Now, it of course goes without saying that combat plays an absolutely massive part in Dead Island 2. After all, it is a zombie survival game, and of course to be able to survive against those zombies, you do need to be able to take out those zombies, which of course involves combat. And in this video, we'll be talking about combat, but the part of combat that we'll be focusing on is the melee weapons. We'll be talking about the best melee weapons within Dead Island 2. We'll go over how the melee weapons work within the game, the best way to use them, and we'll also look at the different rarities that you can get as well. So let's waste no more time and let's get into the best melee weapons that you can use within Dead Island 2 when you're trying to take out that massive horde of zombies. So first of all, we'll go over the different rarities that you can find weapons in when it comes to Dead Island 2. So first of all, there is the improvise. Now, typically you will only ever find melee weapons when it comes to improvise, which is labeled and shown as grey within the game. These are very brittle weapons with very low durability and will literally break after just a handful of swings, and are found occasionally very early on within the game. Then there is the common weapons, which are also labelled as grey. Now these are slightly less brittle weapons compared to the improvised weapons, but they're still very difficult to use. They're not very powerful, they will still break easily, and yeah, don't really pack that much of a punch, to be honest. But then there is uncommon weapons, which are green. These have one modification slot and one perk slot for upgrading them, and of course these are the slightly better weapons within the game, and I have done a video going over the best weapon modifications that you can get within Dead Island 2. I'll link that video in the description below and at the end of this one. So then there are the rare weapons, and these are blue within the game. So these weapons have one mod slot just like the uncommon weapons, but they have two perk slots instead of the one compared to the uncommon weapons for upgrading. They also have one fixed perk slot as well. Then there are superior weapons, which are pink. These have one mod slot, three perk slots for upgrading, and one fixed perk slot just like rare blue, but instead they do have an extra perk slot. And then there is legendary, which is of course gold. These have one modification slot, 2 to 3 perk slots for upgrading depending on the weapon itself, and 2 fixed perk slots. But to be honest, with the legendary weapons, this is all really about the sheer power of the weapons, and it is worth noting these are generally, for pretty much all of them, only found after completing the main story. So if you only plan on completing the main story, then you can really ignore those legendary weapons, but of course they are the best weapons in the game, so there is that. But now let's get into the best melee weapons that you can find and use within Dead Island 2. And to start things off, we have the golf club. Now the golf club is a Headhunter melee weapon that requires you to have a good swing off the golf course if you hope to do the most amount of damage to a zombie's head. The golf club overall has a decent amount of damage, and it is likely that if you are using a Headhunter type weapon, then you are most likely going to be attempting to instantly kill a zombie instead of just knocking them down, which is pretty useful for a golf club, to be honest. Now while the golf club is a brilliant weapon, some of you may struggle to aim for a zombie's head, and this is simply due to the largeness of the golf club when compared to the other Headhunter weapons that you could use. So whilst it's good, there are probably better options, to be honest. And next up is the cleaver. So maiming zombies is by far one of the most useful mechanics in the entirety of Dead Island 2, and therefore focusing on weaponry that can easily do this is an avenue that many of you are likely to walk down constantly throughout your playthrough of Dead Island 2. Now of course, due to that being the case, many of the best weapons within the game fit into the maiming category. Now cleavers are fast to slice and will easily cut through the limbs of the zombies that you will face, and not to mention how incredibly common they are, so you'll always find one that has far better stats than the last one that was discovered. You'll find these all over the place, particularly with loot respawning all of the time. Definitely a very common weapon to use, and definitely a great weapon to use as well. Don't just think because you're seeing it all the time it's a bad weapon. It's actually a very good weapon. The cleaver is definitely a quick and easy to use melee weapon within the game. So next up are claws. Now claws are frenzy weapons within Dead Island 2 that are incredibly hit and miss depending on the situation that you do find yourself in. There are countless frenzy weapons available, but only some of them really require the speed needed to quickly dispatch of enemies. Now unlike other weapons within the game, the metal claws and many other frenzy melee weapons don't require a lot of accuracy to use, and therefore you can slash wildly into zombies as much as you like. Now due to these light slashing attacks, claws aren't great for force and therefore are less likely to knock down an enemy, so you should consider dodging around your targets to avoid getting attacked. So in this situation, if you were to use this weapon, then you definitely want to use the dodge mechanic over the block mechanic, but generally speaking, I would always use the dodge over the block, since yeah, you're less likely to be knocked down, and it just means that even if you don't time it well, you're still able to, you know, avoid taking lots of damage. So yeah, overall I'd always say to use the dodge, but if you are going to use claws, then you definitely want to be using that dodge mechanic over the block. But yeah, the claws are a solid weapon. They aren't great for every scenario, but for these scenarios where they are good, which is, you know, quick attacks and everything like that, then yeah, there's definitely a good option. So next up is a metal bat. Now, Bulldozer weaponry is great for players that are looking for weaponry that not only do a heap of damage, but also hit with a lot of force. The metal baseball bat is definitely going to be a great option for you, especially if you have found yourself feeling as if these hard-hitting melee weapon swings are too slow. Now, these bats, specifically the metal ones, are also incredibly durable, and therefore you are less likely to need to constantly repair them after exploring an area of Hell, and I really do find repairing weapons to be very repetitive and very common to do within Dead Island 2, so being able to minimize that is definitely going to be a plus side for me, and I think it will be for many other people out there as well. It is also worth noting that metal bats have a lot of capability with alternate mods as well as perks to turn them even more ferocious than they already are. Definitely something worth looking into, and especially by watching that modification video that I will link in the description. So next up is katars. Now, claws are not the only weaponry that directly make you feel as if you are simply punching a zombie. As the Headhunter melee weapon, katars also have a chance of dealing some brutal damage when you are up close. Now, unlike the golf club, the katars hit with a tad more force, though they do continue to not be the best for this stat. So while the katars are arguably slower than the golf club by a fraction, you are less likely to get confused on where you are swinging due to your fists being contained. These zombies can also quickly be dealt with from a single heavy attack of the katars, making them even more lethal. Definitely a solid option when you are very close to the zombies. So next up is a pickaxe. Now, while headhunting larger weapons may be a struggle to use, these large and somewhat sluggish melee weapons are actually beneficial for other categories, especially those such as Bulldozer or Maiming like the pickaxe. Swinging at a similar speed to the golf club, the pickaxe should be aimed at the legs of walkers to quickly snap the limbs from underneath them. This makes these zombies a lot easier to deal with, as they can literally only crawl. Now, this combined with the force of the pickaxe means that if you are unable to maim a zombie, you are still likely to knock them down. Definitely a solid option and a pretty powerful one as well. So the second to last best melee weapon within Dead Island 2 is Blood Rage. Something pretty interesting and cool about this weapon is that it was actually used by Jan May in Dead Island and Dead Island Riptide. Blood Rage is also conveniently one of the best headhunter weapons in the game, as it makes dealing with walkers easy as long as you can charge up a lethal hit to the head. Now, apart from this, Blood Rage does incredible damage at a decent speed and has perks which automatically come equipped on the weapon. One of the real standout perks that it does have is Infectious, which causes bleeding to not only affect the zombie being hit, but also those around it. Blood Rage really is a very powerful and very OP weapon that you'll find within Dead Island 2. So we're on to the final melee weapon, well, not the final weapon in the game, there's loads of melee weapons out there, but the final best melee weapon that you can use within Dead Island 2, and that is the machete. This is by far one of the greatest weapons that you will come across in the game. Nothing could ever compare to this lethal blade that slices through the limbs of zombies carelessly. Eventually, you can get your hands on the legendary machete, the Brutalizer, by completing all of the side quests in the body art, which will see you collecting different body parts for a questionable artist, and then you will get your hands on that legendary machete. Any sort of machete is going to be pretty solid within the game, but of course that legendary one really will be the best of the best. And there we go, that does just about wrap up things here. Those are the best melee weapons that you can use within Dead Island 2. Now, on screen now, you are seeing a link to a video where I go over the best weapon modifications that you can use within Dead Island 2. Hit the link on the screen now if you are interested in watching that.